Welcome to the Lectric Service Center in our temporary workshop. Today, we'll be showing you how to replace your mechanical disc brake calipers with hydraulic disc brake calipers. Before we begin, you'll need to make sure that you have some tools ready to go. You will need a 2.5mm Allen wrench, a 5mm Allen wrench, zip ties, side cutters, a flathead screwdriver, a 15mm socket, a hand ratchet, a 5mm Allen socket, and a torque wrench. We recommend performing this with your bike on a bike stand. This will make the process easier and safer. We also highly encourage you to remove the battery from the bike when performing this maintenance. This will ensure that there is no voltage running through the bike. Let's take a second to talk about what came in your package. You received 2 hydraulic brake calipers with pre-installed brake hoses and brake levers. The shorter of the two is the front brake, and the longer of the two is the rear brake. You also received an updated front wheel. This wheel is compatible with the new front caliper. If you do not replace your front wheel, the caliper will rub against the spokes. A note, the tube has arrived uninflated. Make sure to fill it up with the recommended PSI on the sidewall of the tire. First, undo the cable wrapping holding the cables from the handlebar together. And then the 2 spots of cable wrapping under the frame of the bike. Hold on to these as you'll be wrapping the new cables up with it. Next, remove the plugs from the end of both sides of the handlebars and the grips. Remove the plug by working a flathead screwdriver around the edges of the plug. Be careful not to pull too hard in one area, as this may damage the plug. Make sure to save these as you'll need them when putting everything back together. Then, remove the washer from the throttle. Make sure not to lose the throttle washer, as your throttle will not function properly without it. Then, use a 2.5mm Allen wrench to remove the throttle. Now, let's start replacing the rear caliper. Use the cable cutters to snip the end of the brake cable off. Doing so will remove the silver cap from the end of the cable. Next, loosen the cable retention screw with a 5mm Allen wrench so that you can remove the brake cable from the cable retention arm. Remove the brake cable from the lower barrel adjusters. Then, unscrew the 2 caliper mounting bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench. Make sure to save these bolts as well, as you'll need them to mount your new caliper onto your bike. Snip the 3 zip ties that are fastened to the bosses on the dropouts of the non-drive side of the bike. If you are replacing the brake caliper on an XP step-through, there will be 2 additional cylinders on the dropouts that the brake cable is fed through. This means that the zip ties will be attaching 2 cables together rather than attaching to the bike. You can snip these zip ties, but be careful not to cut the cables. Then, track the brake cable housing all the way back up to the brake lever. Unplug the brake inhibitor. This is the cable that has a quick plug a few inches down from the brake lever. Unhook the brake cable from the brake cable mount, and pull the housing all the way out through the bike. You will now need to remove the brake lever. Use a 5mm Allen wrench to loosen the screw on the underside of the brake lever base. Then, slide the brake lever off the handlebar. You will no longer need these. Now, on the other side of the handlebars, disconnect the brake inhibitor from the brake. Loosen the mounting screw with a 5mm Allen wrench. Then slide the brake lever off of the handlebar. Again, you will not need these. Down on the front fork, the brake housing runs through a clip to keep it in place. Make sure to remove the housing by angling the housing and pulling it through the opening. Now, remove the front brake caliper by removing the caliper mounting bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench. Now, you'll need to remove the front wheel in order to replace it with the new wheel. Using a 15mm socket, loosen the axle nuts. Then, unhook the hangers from the fork and pull the wheel out of the dropouts. Let's start the install process with the rear brake caliper. Make sure you use the longer of the two cables. This is because the front cable will not reach the rear caliper. First, slide the new lever on the right side of the handlebars. Again, making sure to place the lever that is connected to the longer brake cable on the right side of the handlebars. Next, plug in the brake inhibitor by lining up the arrows on the quick plug. Now, run the cable down the bike, over the fork, and down the length of the frame. Make sure when feeding the brake cable to the rear caliper, you do not feed them through the two-cylinder bosses on the bottom of the frame. If you have a step-through model, you will need to feed the caliper through the bottom base of the frame. Feed the caliper through the inside of the dropout, then between the bike rack and the spokes on the non-drive side of the bike. Now, remove the orange tag from the inside of the brake caliper and toss it. Place the caliper into the mounting points, then tighten the mounting bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench to the point where the caliper stays on but can still freely move over the rotor. You will tighten these later. Now, onto the front brake, place your new front wheel into the front dropout. Lightly tighten the axle bolts by hand so that you can take the bike off the bike stand without the wheel falling off. Then put the bike on the ground as straight as possible and torque the axle nuts down to 35 Nm. Now, let's install the front brake cable. Make sure you're installing the shorter of the two cables. Slide the brake lever onto the left side of the handlebars, then plug in the brake inhibitor. Next, down at the fork, install the housing into the clip on the fork. Make sure to feed the caliper between the fender stay and the spokes. Remove the orange tag from the inside of the brake caliper and toss it. Now, line up the holes on the caliper with the holes on the caliper mounting system. Then tighten the mounting bolts with a 5mm Allen wrench to the point where the caliper stays on but can still freely move over the rotor. Now that both calipers are secured, you'll need to re-zip tie the cables to the bosses on the dropouts. Then, snip the excess. A reminder, if you have a step-through model, there will be two-cylinder bosses that you will be zip tying the cables to. Next, rewrap all cables onto the frame starting at the second boss. Then, rewrap the next section of cables in between the last boss and the first boss. Next, grab the 3 cables and the front brake cable. Wrap until you get to the light cable, then include that into the wrapping process. But exclude the light cable quick plug. Continue wrapping until you get to the large cable housing on the front cables. Wrap the cables that are connected to that. Then, once past the cable housing, begin to wrap and include all of the cables again. Continue that cable wrap until you reach the quick plugs. Then, continue to wrap only the brake housing and the shifter cable, leaving the quick plugs exposed. Then finish the wrap with all of the cables after the quick plug until there is no longer any cable to wrap. Then, use the shortest cable wrapping for the left side of the handlebars. Wrap all of those cables, leaving the 2 cables from the display exposed. Next, you will need to reinstall everything on the handlebars. Place the throttle on the handlebars, sliding both the throttle and the new brake lever into place. Tighten the brake lever down with a 5mm Allen wrench. Then tighten the throttle down with a 2.5mm Allen wrench. Then, slide the throttle washer back into place. Finally, slide the grip back into place and place the plug back into the end of the handlebars. Now, onto the other side, repeat this process without the throttle. Tighten the brake lever down with a 5mm Allen wrench, slide the grip back on, and insert the plug. Next, tighten the brake levers down to 6 to 8 Nm. Finally, you will need to align your brake calipers. Using a 5mm Allen wrench, align the caliper so that there is a 1/4 to a 1/2 mm of space between either side of the rotor, as seen here. You can repeat this process exactly on the front rotor. Make sure that both brake levers are parallel to the handlebars when they are pulled. If they are not, please contact our customer support team immediately. The final step is to torque down the caliper mounting bolts to 6 to 8 Nm. If you test your brakes and they are not working properly, please contact our customer support team before your next ride. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our customer support team at contact@lectricebikes.com or give us a call at 602-715-0907. Thanks for watching.